What if the world before the flood held secrets God never meant forgotten? Beyond Eden's gates, something was hidden, a truth the Book of Enoch dared to record, while Genesis stayed silent. Genesis tells you Adam and Eve left the garden. It does not tell you what happened after the gate closed behind them, and it does not tell you who was watching. The Book of Enoch does, and what it describes is not a quiet exile into farmland and hardship. It is the beginning of a war that would end with the entire earth underwater. Before the flood, the world was not empty. It was crowded with beings the church rarely mentions from the pulpit. Genesis 6 drops a single strange line into the narrative. The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. No explanation, no warning, just a sentence. And then the world moves on as if nothing unusual happened. But something did happen, and Enoch was the one who wrote it down in full. The sons of God were not men. In Hebrew tradition, that phrase Bene Elohim refers to heavenly beings, members of the divine council, angels who stood in the presence of God. Job uses the same term to describe angelic beings who shouted for joy at creation. So when Genesis says these beings came down and took human wives, it is not describing a poetic metaphor. It is describing a rebellion. Enoch names them. 200 angels called Watchers descended on Mount Hermon and bound themselves by oath to break the boundary between heaven and earth. Their leader was Shemihazah. Beside him stood Azazel, the one who would later be blamed for teaching humanity how to forge weapons, how to paint their faces, how to seduce and manipulate. These were not distant, abstract spirits. They were teachers, and what they taught reshaped the world. Enoch describes their instruction in disturbing detail. Azazel taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, turning simple tribes into armies capable of slaughter on a scale the earth had never witnessed. Other watchers taught the cutting of roots, the casting of spells, the reading of stars, the movements of the moon, secrets that were never meant to pass from heaven into human hands. Knowledge itself became a weapon, and humanity, still young and untested, had no defense against what it was suddenly given. What should have elevated civilization instead poisoned it, because the knowledge arrived without wisdom to guide it, without the boundaries God had intended to keep pace with human growth. Their children were the Nephilim, giants whose size and hunger the earth had never seen before. Numbers 13 remembers them centuries later, when the Israelite spies returned from Canaan trembling. There we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. Even after the flood, their memory terrified an entire generation of soldiers. But Enoch tells you what numbers cannot. He tells you what the Nephilim did to a world unprepared for them. They consumed everything humanity produced, and when that was not enough, they turned on humanity itself. Enoch describes them devouring men, and then, when men were gone, turning on birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and finally, disturbingly, on each other. The earth was not simply corrupted, it was being consumed alive by its own inhabitants. This is the part institutional teaching skips. Sunday school gives you Noah, the ark, the animals 2 by 2, a rainbow at the end. It rarely gives you the reason God regretted making humanity in the first place. Genesis 6:5 says, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That is not the language of ordinary sin. That is the language of a world that had been fundamentally altered by something outside itself. Enoch fills in what Genesis leaves in shadow. He records the cry that rose up from a dying earth, a cry so loud it reached heaven itself. The souls of the murdered, the blood spilled by giants who knew no restraint, cried out for judgment. And 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looked down and brought that cry before the throne of God. What God decided next was not a single act of destruction. It was a series of judgments, aimed first at the watchers themselves. Azazel would be bound and cast into darkness. Shemihazah and his companions would watch their own children die in front of them before facing their own imprisonment. And Uriel would be sent to warn one man, Noah, that the earth itself was about to be undone. This is where the story most people know actually begins. But by the time the rain starts falling in Genesis chapter 7, The real story, the one Enoch preserved in painstaking detail, had already been unfolding for generations. The flood was not a random act of divine anger. It was the final response to a corruption that started the moment angelic beings decided the boundary between heaven and earth was optional. Jude, writing centuries later in the New Testament, still remembered this. He wrote of the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, and said, God hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Jude was not inventing a new idea. He was quoting a tradition ancient Israel had never fully forgotten, one Enoch had written down long before Genesis was compiled in its current form. If this is the first time you are encountering the full weight of that history, you are not alone, and you are exactly where you need to be. This channel exists for people who feel the same pull you do, the sense that Scripture holds more than what gets read aloud on a Sunday morning. If that pull is real for you, subscribing costs nothing and keeps you connected to every hidden thread we uncover next. And if you want to go even deeper than any video can take you, we put together something special. Our premium illustrated guide, The Forbidden Book of Enoch, walks you through every detail of the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the world before the flood, with illustrations that bring these ancient beings to life in a way words alone cannot. It is the resource so many of you have asked for, the one that finally puts the full, uncensored account in your hands. You will find the link waiting for you in the very first comment pinned below. What happened next to those fallen angels, and where they are being held right now, according to Enoch, is even stranger than anything you have heard so far. Enoch describes a mountain called Hermon, and he tells you why that name mattered to the men who first heard this story. In Hebrew, the word carries the sense of a curse, a place set apart because of what was sworn there. 200 watchers stood on its summit and bound themselves by oath before they descended, knowing exactly what they were about to break. That detail matters more than most readers realize. This was not seduction that caught angels off guard. It was premeditated rebellion, sealed by agreement before a single wife was taken. Once judgment came, it did not fall evenly. God sent Raphael first, and his assignment was Azazel specifically, the Watcher, who had armed humanity and taught it how to kill. Enoch records the instructions given to Raphael with startling precision. Bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him there. The text does not stop at binding. It says to cover him with rough and jagged rocks, to leave him in darkness permanently, his face covered so he could see nothing, and there he would remain until the day of judgment, when he would be cast into fire. This was not a metaphor for consequence. Enoch describes an actual location, a desert pit sealed and hidden, where one of the most powerful beings responsible for corrupting the ancient world sits imprisoned right now, according to this tradition, still waiting. Ancient Near Eastern texts describe Dudael as a real wilderness region, and some later Jewish commentators tied it to the very ritual of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when a goat bearing the sins of Israel was sent out into the wilderness to Azazel. The connection is not accidental. The scapegoat ritual, one of the most sacred acts in the entire Hebrew calendar, carries the name of a fallen angel bound in darkness for his crimes against creation. Think about what that means for a moment. Every year on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, the high priest laid his hands on a goat and confessed over it the sins of the entire nation, then sent it into the wilderness, toward the very place tradition said a rebellious angel lay bound. The ritual was not random. It was a yearly reminder, carried out generation after generation, that sin had a source outside humanity itself, a source that had already been judged and imprisoned, waiting for a final reckoning that had not yet come. Most people who read Leviticus today never learn where the goat was actually being sent, or why that destination carried such weight in the ancient world. Shemihazah's punishment was different, and in some ways harder. Gabriel was given a different task, one aimed not at the watchers themselves, but at what they had created. Go to the biters and the reprobates, and to the children of fornication, and destroy the children of fornication, and the children of the watchers from amongst men. Gabriel was sent to turn the Nephilim against each other, to let them destroy one another in the very violence they had brought into the world. The giants who had devoured humanity and creation alike were made to consume their own kind until nothing remained. It was judgment, but it was also a mirror, forcing the Nephilim to become victims of the very hunger they had unleashed. Michael's assignment reached the Watchers directly. He was told to bind Shemihazah and his companions for 70 generations, sealing them beneath the hills of the earth until the day appointed for their final judgment, when they would be led away to the abyss of fire to torment and to shutting up in prison forever. 70 generations is not a small number in ancient reckoning. It stretches across centuries, a sentence long enough that the beings who broke heaven's boundary would watch the world change entirely without them, powerless to influence it again until the appointed hour. There is something deliberate in how these three punishments differ. Azazel, isolated in absolute darkness, unable even to see. Shemihazah and his companions, buried beneath the earth, bound but aware. And the Nephilim, left to devour each other in the daylight, watched by the very fathers who could do nothing to stop it. Each punishment answers the specific crime. Azazel taught deception and concealment, so he was hidden from all sight. Shemihazah led a rebellion meant to reshape the world from beneath its surface, so he was buried beneath it. And the Nephilim, born from violence, were consumed by violence. Scripture outside of Enoch still carries the echo of this. 2 Peter says plainly that God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment. Jude repeats it almost word for word, describing angels reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Neither writer explains who these angels were or what exactly they had done. They assumed their audience already knew, because the story Enoch told had been passed down for generations before either letter was written. It was common knowledge in the world of early Judaism and early Christianity, even if centuries later it would be pushed to the margins of accepted teaching. What is striking is how much restraint the punishment shows. These were beings powerful enough to reshape human civilization within a few generations, powerful enough to father giants who terrified armies for centuries after their death. And yet none of them were destroyed outright. They were bound, sealed, hidden, held for a future reckoning rather than erased. There is a reason ancient readers found this comforting rather than unsettling. A God who could bind beings this powerful, who could seal them beneath mountains and inside desert pits, was a God still fully in control, even while evil seemed to be winning on the surface of the earth. The imprisonment was proof that nothing had escaped notice, that no act of rebellion, however vast, had gone unanswered. It simply had not yet reached its final chapter. For a people who had watched violence and corruption spread across generations without visible intervention, that promise of a delayed but certain judgment carried real weight. That detail raises a question few sermons ever ask out loud. If God's justice against the Watchers was postponed rather than immediate, what does that mean for the corruption they left behind? The corruption that did not simply vanish when they were imprisoned, but kept spreading through the generations that followed them toward the flood. The giants were dying, the leaders were bound, but the world they had shaped was still moving toward something even Noah could not have imagined. The world Noah was born into had already forgotten what silence sounded like. Enoch describes an earth groaning under the weight of blood that had not yet been avenged, and Genesis 6:11 confirms it in a single blunt sentence. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Not scattered violence, not isolated incidents passed down as warnings, filled. As if violence had become the water people drank and the air people breathed, so ordinary that no one alive could remember what peace had looked like. By the time Noah reached adulthood, the Nephilim bloodline had spread across regions far beyond Hermon. Enoch's account and the fragments preserved in the Book of Giants describe these offspring not merely as tall men, but as something categorically different, hybrids whose appetite for destruction outpaced anything the earth had encountered. The Book of Giants, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, gives names to some of these figures, including Gilgamesh and Humbaba, names later Mesopotamian legend would preserve independently in the Epic of Gilgamesh. That overlap is not something scholars can easily dismiss. Two entirely separate ancient traditions, one Hebrew and one Mesopotamian, remembering the same catastrophic figures from the same corrupted age. That overlap is not something scholars can easily dismiss. Two entirely separate ancient traditions, one Hebrew and one Mesopotamian, remembering the same catastrophic figures from the same corrupted age. It raises a question that rarely gets asked in ordinary Bible study. What if the flood myths scattered across nearly every ancient civilization on Earth, from Mesopotamia to Greece to accounts recorded in Mesoamerica, were not separate inventions but fractured memories of the same real catastrophe? Each culture preserving its own distorted echo of a history everyone once shared before the world's population scattered and its languages divided. The giants dreamed according to these fragments, and their dreams terrified them. One vision described a great garden being uprooted, all but one tree destroyed, an image the giants themselves suspected foretold their own destruction. They sent a messenger to ask Enoch, who by then had already been taken up and separated from ordinary human life, what the dream meant. Enoch's response was not comfort. It was confirmation. Their doom was already written, and no rebellion of theirs would postpone it. Meanwhile, the corruption Azazel had unleashed kept multiplying on its own, independent of the giants entirely. Enoch describes how human women learned methods of adornment and seduction directly from Watcher instruction, techniques designed to manipulate rather than simply attract. Weapons technology, once introduced, could not be uninvented. Tribes that had lived by farming and herding now had the means to conquer their neighbors outright, and once one group armed itself, every neighboring group had no choice but to follow. Violence was not simply tolerated in this world. It had become structurally necessary for survival, a self-perpetuating machine that no single act of repentance could dismantle. Genesis 6:12 adds a detail that deserves more attention than it typically receives. God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. All flesh. Not merely the Nephilim, not merely the Watchers, but humanity itself, willingly absorbed into a pattern of corruption it had not originally created, but had thoroughly adopted. This matters because it complicates any reading that blames the flood purely on angelic interference. By the time judgment came, ordinary men and women had become active participants in the very corruption that was destroying them. Against this backdrop, one man is described in Genesis with a phrase that stands out precisely because it is so rare. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord and was called a just man and perfect in his generations, a man who walked with God. That last phrase echoes the description given only once before of Enoch himself, who also walked with God before being taken. The repetition is not accidental. Scripture is drawing a direct line between two men, generations apart, who resisted a corruption so total that resisting it had become almost unimaginable. What made Noah different was not merely moral effort. Some Jewish and early Christian interpreters, drawing on Enoch's account, understood perfect in his generations to carry a genealogical weight, suggesting Noah's bloodline had remained untouched by the corruption spreading through the Nephilim lines around him. Whether read genetically or simply morally, the point Genesis makes is the same. In a world where nearly everyone had been absorbed into the pattern Azazel and the Watchers had set in motion, one family had not. This is worth sitting with for a moment. If corruption could spread this thoroughly, touching bloodlines, reshaping culture, redefining what counted as normal within a handful of generations, then Noah's survival was never guaranteed by circumstance. It had to be preserved deliberately, watched over, protected against a tide that had already swallowed everyone else. That is not the picture of a distant, uninvolved God simply waiting to punish. It is the picture of a God actively working within a corrupted world to keep one line, one family, one hope from being erased entirely before the judgment could arrive. Uriel was given the task of finding that family. Enoch records the angel's warning delivered directly to Noah, informing him that the earth was about to be destroyed by a flood and instructing him in what would come. This detail changes how the flood narrative should be read. It was not a sudden, arbitrary catastrophe dropped on an unsuspecting world. It was the culmination of judgments that had already begun with the binding of the Watchers, now extending to the corrupted creation those Watchers had left behind. Noah was not simply lucky to be warned. He was the last thread connecting the pre-flood world to whatever would come after it, and heaven made certain that thread would not be severed. The years leading up to the flood, according to this tradition, were not years of gradual decline, but of active, escalating horror, giants consuming what remained of a devastated ecosystem, human violence normalized across generations, and a righteous family building something enormous in full view of neighbors who almost certainly mocked them for it. Every plank Noah nailed into place was a public statement that judgment was coming, and every day that passed without rain must have made that statement seem more absurd to everyone watching. Enoch's account gives weight to what Genesis compresses into a handful of verses, transforming Noah's obedience from a simple act of faith into an act of defiance against an entire corrupted civilization that had long since stopped listening for warnings at all. Enoch does not describe the flood as sudden. He describes it as inevitable, the final stage of a judgment set in motion the moment Shemihazah and his companions swore their oath on Hermon. By the time Noah finished the ark, everyone around him had watched him build it for decades. Genesis gives no exact figure for how long construction took, but Jewish tradition and the internal chronology of Genesis suggest close to a century passed between God's warning and the rain finally falling. A century of hammering, a century of neighbors walking past an enormous wooden structure rising in the middle of dry land, a century of mockery that must have worn on Noah's family in ways Scripture only hints at. Consider what that century actually meant on the ground. There was no cloud in the sky to justify the work, no river overflowing its banks, no storm season anyone could point to as evidence that Noah's warning carried any weight at all. Just one man, his sons, and their wives, cutting gopher wood and coating it with pitch year after year, decade after decade, while an entire civilization watched and concluded he had lost his mind. 2 Peter calls Noah a preacher of righteousness, language that suggests he was not building in silence. He was likely warning people the entire time, and the ark itself, rising taller each season, was the most visible sermon anyone in that world would ever see. And still, according to Genesis, only 8 people believed him enough to walk through that door when it finally mattered. Genesis 7:16 contains a detail that carries more weight than most readers give it, and the Lord shut him in. Not Noah closing the door himself, the Lord shutting it. After 8 people and pairs of every living creature had entered, God himself sealed the entrance, and from that moment forward nothing else could get in and nothing inside could get out. This was not simply weatherproofing against rain. It was a final, irreversible severing of the old world from the new one being preserved inside that vessel. Whatever pleading happened outside those walls in the hours before the water rose, and ancient tradition suggests there was pleading, desperate hands against sealed wood, it changed nothing. The door God closed stayed closed. Enoch's account, along with later rabbinic tradition, describes the flood itself as something more violent and more comprehensive than a simple rise in water level. The fountains of the great deep were broken up, Genesis 7:11 says, alongside the windows of heaven opening. 2 separate sources of water, one from below and one from above, converging simultaneously. This detail matters because it describes a planet being unmade at a structural level, not merely flooded from rainfall but torn open from beneath, subterranean reservoirs releasing water that had been sealed since creation. Whatever the pre-flood world looked like geologically, whatever mountains, valleys, and coastlines existed before that day, none of it would look the same afterward. The Nephilim, according to Enoch's account, did not simply drown quietly alongside everyone else. Some later Jewish traditions, expanding on Enoch's framework, describe the giants attempting to fight the rising waters themselves, using their immense size and strength to hold back what could not be held back, their bodies eventually giving way to a force no amount of raw power could resist. Whether or not every detail of that tradition is historical, the underlying claim in Enoch is consistent. Their physical bodies died, but something else about them did not simply cease to exist. This is where Enoch introduces one of the most unsettling ideas in the entire text. The Nephilim were hybrid beings, part angelic and part human, and Enoch describes their spirits as something categorically different from ordinary human souls at death. Because their fathers were angelic beings who did not possess mortal bodies to begin with, and their mothers were human, The spirits released at their death had no proper place to go. They were not fully human souls destined for the realm of the dead, and they were not angels who could simply return to heaven, since heaven had already cast their fathers out. Enoch describes these spirits as remaining on the earth itself, becoming what later tradition would call evil spirits, wandering, hungry, connected to the corruption their bodies had once embodied while alive. That single detail reframes an enormous amount of later biblical language about demonic activity. When the New Testament describes unclean spirits roaming, seeking rest and finding none, when it describes territories and regions infested with spiritual corruption tied to specific locations, Enoch's account offers a possible origin story that Genesis alone never provides. These were not spirits created directly evil by God. They were the leftover consequence of the Watchers' rebellion, the spiritual residue of hybrid beings whose physical bodies had been destroyed in the flood, but whose essential nature had nowhere sanctioned to go. Meanwhile, inside the ark, 8 people rode out a catastrophe that had erased everything they had ever known. Enoch does not spend much time on the interior experience of the voyage itself, but the silence outside the sealed door must have been its own kind of testimony. Whatever screaming, whatever desperate final acts happened beyond that wood, the family inside heard none of it, protected by a barrier God himself had put in place. When the waters finally receded and the ark settled on the mountains of Ararat, the world Noah's family stepped into bore almost no resemblance to the one they had left. The giants were gone. The Watchers remained bound beneath the earth and inside their sealed pits, still awaiting final judgment. But their spiritual offspring, the corrupted remnant Enoch describes, had not been washed away with everything else. They were still here, waiting in a world that had just been given a second chance. It did not yet know how fragile that chance really was. This is why the story does not end cleanly the way Sunday school illustrations suggest, with a rainbow and a fresh start, and nothing left to worry about. Enoch's account makes clear that the flood dealt with bodies, not with everything the rebellion on Hermon had unleashed. The physical threat was gone, but the spiritual residue remained embedded in a world that would soon rebuild, repopulate, and before long, according to later chapters of Genesis, begin drifting toward corruption all over again. Noah stepped off that mountain into cleaner air and quieter ground, but he stepped into a world that was starting over, not a world that had been made permanently safe. If the flood was meant to erase the Nephilim bloodline entirely, something clearly went wrong, because Genesis 6:4 contains a phrase that unsettles careful readers every time they actually stop to look at it. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, after the flood. The very text that describes the catastrophe meant to end this corruption admits, almost in passing, that giants were still walking the earth generations later. Enoch's framework helps explain how, since Noah's own family, according to some ancient interpreters, may not have been the only bloodline that survived the water in some form, or corruption found new ground to take root in almost immediately after humanity began to rebuild. Some later Jewish sources go even further, preserving a tradition that Og himself survived the flood entirely, clinging to the outside of the ark or riding out the catastrophe by some other means, depending on which version of the legend a given rabbi preserved. Whether or not that specific tradition reflects historical fact, its very existence tells you something important. Ancient readers were troubled by the same question modern readers ask when they hit Genesis 6:4. If the flood was total, if every living thing outside the ark perished, how does a giant bloodline reappear within a handful of generations, fully formed, fully established, ruling entire cities by the time Israel encountered them centuries later? The text does not answer this cleanly, and Enoch's account, along with these later traditions, suggests that whatever corruption the Watchers introduced was not entirely dependent on a single unbroken bloodline to resurface. It found other paths back into the world. Numbers 13 confirms this survival in vivid detail. When Moses sent 12 spies into Canaan centuries after the flood, they returned describing the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, men whose size made the Israelite scouts feel like grasshoppers by comparison. Deuteronomy 3:11 goes further, describing Og, king of Bashan, as of the remnant of giants, and preserving an almost forensic detail. His iron bedstead measured 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide, roughly 13 feet by 6 feet, a piece of furniture built for a body no ordinary human frame could have required. This was not legend dressed up as history. This was a specific measurement, recorded because it mattered to the people who wrote it down. Evidence they wanted remembered precisely because they knew future generations would find it hard to believe. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Amim, the Zamzumim, each of these names scattered across the books of Genesis. Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua describes regional giant clans that Israel encountered as they moved toward the Promised Land. Deuteronomy 2 describes entire nations that had already fought and displaced these giant peoples before Israel arrived, meaning the corruption Enoch describes was not confined to a single Nephilim bloodline, but had apparently taken root across multiple regions of the ancient Near East, each with its own name, its own territory, its own terrifying reputation among neighboring peoples who had to learn to survive beside them. This is where the story stops being confined to ancient scrolls and starts intersecting with stones people can still walk among today. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey predates Stonehenge by roughly 6,000 years, massive carved pillars arranged with a precision that still puzzles archaeologists studying a site built, according to conventional timelines, by hunter-gatherers who supposedly had not yet developed agriculture or complex tools. Baalbek in Lebanon contains stones in its foundation weighing well over 800 tons each, quarried, moved, and placed with a level of engineering that modern cranes would strain to replicate even today. Pumapunku, high in the Bolivian mountains, features precisely cut andesite blocks with interlocking geometric joints that fit so tightly no mortar was needed, a level of stonework some engineers argue exceeds what most ancient civilizations are credited with achieving. Pumapunku, high in the Bolivian mountains, features precisely cut andesite blocks with interlocking geometric joints that fit so tightly no mortar was needed. A level of stonework some engineers argue exceeds what most ancient civilizations are credited with achieving. Sacsayhuaman, overlooking the city of Cusco in Peru, presents a similar puzzle. Its walls are built from stones weighing up to well over 100 tons, cut into irregular polygonal shapes and fitted together so precisely that not even a blade of grass can slide between them, or without mortar, or without the wheel or iron tools the builders are conventionally believed to have possessed. Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, shares this same signature of impossibly precise stonework, paired with a level of astronomical alignment that suggests knowledge of the sky far beyond what a purely agricultural society would typically need. And off the coast of Japan, the underwater formations at Yonaguni present right-angles, staircases, and terraces, so geometrically regular that researchers remain divided decades later over whether they are natural or carved, submerged evidence, if carved, of construction from a period when sea levels stood dramatically lower than they do today. None of these sites come with a label confirming Nephilim involvement. Scripture does not name them directly, but the pattern is difficult to ignore once you have read Enoch's account of angelic beings teaching forbidden knowledge, teaching metallurgy, teaching techniques the earth had never possessed before that rebellion on Hermon. If beings with knowledge beyond human capability once walked among ancient builders, structures like these stop looking like mysteries and start looking like fingerprints, evidence of a world whose full history has been deliberately left out of the textbooks most people grew up trusting completely. Jesus himself, centuries later, pointed backward to this exact period as the template for what was still to come. Matthew 24:37 records his own words with unsettling precision. As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Not a vague comparison, a direct parallel spoken by Christ himself, tying the corruption, the violence, the spiritual rebellion of the pre-flood world to conditions he expected to reappear before his own return. If the days of Noah involved fallen angels, hybrid giants, weaponized knowledge, and a civilization so thoroughly corrupted that only 8 people were found righteous, then Jesus was not simply warning about ordinary sin returning. He was pointing toward a specific, recognizable pattern, one Enoch had already described in exhaustive detail centuries before the gospel writers put his words on record. And once you see that pattern clearly, once you understand what actually filled the earth in the days before the flood, it becomes almost impossible to read Christ's warning as a casual comparison. It reads instead like a direct signal, telling anyone willing to study Enoch's account exactly what kind of world to watch for as the appointed time draws near again. Thank you for staying with this all the way to the end. Stories like this, the ones institutional teaching so often leaves buried, deserve to be told in full, and you showed up for every piece of it. If Enoch's account opened your eyes to something you had never been taught, that alone was worth the time you gave us today. If you want the complete, illustrated journey through everything the Watchers hid, everything Enoch preserved, our premium guide is waiting for you in the first comment pinned below, ready whenever you are. Subscribe so you never miss what we uncover next. Like this video if it moved you. Comment and tell us which part surprised you most. And stay close because the next video is already loading right now, and it goes even deeper than this one.